and they said, you know what, we're going to go rent for 12 months and we're going to buy a bigger house, which is always what we wanted to do. And no, everyone's waiting right now for a better entry point. So the market's down, let's say in Vancouver here, let's call it 15%. So I'm waiting for a better entry point. I'm like, well, I sold your place at the highs. You've now got an opportunity to buy back into 15% lower, and you're waiting. And you and everybody else is waiting. But when the market's at all-time highs back in January, February, everyone was trampling over each other to get into the market. Nobody wanted to wait. It's human behavior to follow the herd, to follow what your peers are doing. When your friends and family are telling you you're crazy for buying right now, the market's down 15%. Why would you buy? And I think now is actually the time you're not going to time the bottom. If you buy today, yeah, it probably will move lower.
Welcome to the Tom Storey Show with Steve Karrasch and Tom Storey, where we discuss everything real estate or whatever else is on our minds.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Tom Storey Show. Just a friendly reminder, if you haven't already, on this brand new YouTube channel, we're at 1,200 subscribers. We're trying to get it to 2,000 by April 1st. So we'll see if it's an April Fool's joke. We're not sure yet, but that is the goal moving forward. And thank you for everyone who's left a review on Apple Podcasts. I think we're at like 50 reviews now, and it keeps growing every single week. So thank you for being here. I'm really thrilled to announce who our guest is going to be this week. So I joke with our co-host, Steve Karrasch, that he is Steve number 2. And there's another Steve. There's another Steve in BC, in the West Coast, the best coast. Well, maybe not the best coast for me, but a lot of people say that. Steve Saretsky has joined us. He is a Vancouver real estate agent. He is the host of the Loonie Hour podcast and just so happens to run, frankly, one of the biggest and most influential YouTube channels on Canadian real estate. So, Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So what's going on, man? Happy New Year. We had Nolan on last week. I asked him about resolutions. You got any resolutions heading into 2023?
I don't know. I mean, just try to continue to grow like the business and the team. I mean, that's pretty much it. Just, I think this year is just basically just trying to focus and dial that. I'm sure I'm like you get a lot of opportunities and you have to learn to start to say no to more and more things and just kind of like hone in on really sort of, for me, I think the biggest thing is just at this point, it's becoming time constraints. Just getting pulled in so many different directions. You're like, okay, I just have to figure out like what I actually enjoy doing and then just spending my time doing those things. So that's kind of the big, I guess, goal in 2023.
It's funny you say that. When I was doing my business planning at the end of last year, the number one thing I wrote down was getting better at saying no as well. So we appreciate you saying yes to be here, by the way. Thank you for that.
Of course, man. It's I'm sure, as you know, right? It's like, yeah. And you don't want to sound like, like an ass or anything, but the reality is if you say yes to everyone, you're not going to have any time to actually like focus and build your business and spend time with like your family. And so, yeah, it's tough, but you got to say no.
So you're primarily working out of Vancouver. Are you downtown Vancouver? Like are you all of Vancouver? What does your business look like?
Yeah, I mean, I live on the west side. Our office is on the west side here, but the reality is it's like Vancouver East, Vancouver West. It kind of ends up blurring in. So we do pretty much like a mix throughout the whole city of Vancouver. My business is built like predominantly online, a lot of referrals, a lot of people basically like reaching out and saying, hey, we want to work with you and following your stuff for 8 months or something along those lines. So, there are times where we'll venture out of Vancouver. Like people might start the search and say, I'm starting in Vancouver, but I'm also open to, Burnaby and North Vancouver. And so you might drift over there sometimes as well. But yeah, it's all referral based. And so we tend to have a really good, loyal client base.
Now, do you look down on Steve Karrasch and his market because they use lock boxes? I want to get to the bottom of this.
This is actually an important topic. For anyone that maybe isn't aware, the city of Vancouver, I would say Greater Vancouver, does not use lock boxes. I think we might be one of the only cities in all of North America. They do not exist. So the buyer's agent and the listing agent will always show up for both appointments. So you can imagine myself, let's say I'm taking around a buyer and they want to view 5 properties. I have a full-time assistant. Like, it's like her full-time job is basically just coordinating showings for my buyers, because trying to get 5 showings lined up back to back to back means you have to basically get my schedule to line up, the listing agent's schedule to line up, the seller's schedule to line up, and the buyer's schedule all to line up perfectly. So lock boxes, for whatever reason, I'm hoping they come here at some point, but nobody seems to want to break the mold, break the trend, and get it going over here.
And then Steve Karrasch, on the other side, when you have Vancouver agents coming to your market to show your properties, and they're like, well, what the hell is this code? Like, what's this lockbox code like? Is it equally as annoying on that end of things?
It's super annoying because they're like, well, I don't have a lockbox key because we use a key card for them. Okay. And it's like, well, the Fraser Valley board supplies them free to their agents, right? So it's a real fight. It's a big fight. But the argument has always been, in Vancouver agents, I service my listing. I show up to my listing. I make sure it's secure. I do all those things, right? And then the other side of the coin for us is we want to make sure, I guess the lockbox argument is the property is available as possible. Mm-hmm. So you kind of have to pick your agent and what you want, because I mean, I'll tell it from the Fraser Valley point of view. The listing agent, if their schedule does not align, often does not tell their seller that there was a showing request, right? So somebody like Steve or myself, if you're doing that type of business model, you often need a team, or I think Keith Roy calls them human lockboxes, like a showing agent to go open all the doors, right? So instead of a tool that we can all use fairly safely, it's employment. So maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's not a good thing, but it is a constant thing when you're interviewing a Vancouver agent versus a Fraser Valley agent of which service they will provide. And there's positives and negatives to both.
Do you know what's funny though? Is like the sellers in Vancouver, there's like this stigma. It's not like the realtors don't want to use lock boxes. There's like a stigma around the sellers. I guess like they haven't been acclimatized to it. And so like, what do you mean I'm paying you, 7 and 2.5% to, to not show up just to put a lockbox on it? Like, what's Correct. The point? Yeah. Why am I paying you? And it's like, but I think the counter argument, in my opinion, is like, well, yeah, like if I'm busy and my team can't make it, like we want to get as many buyers through your property as possible. Like I think it's actually better for your property. Like, okay, the reality is like if I'm opening the door for a 1-bedroom condo in Vancouver that's 500 square feet, there's not really a whole lot I can show you. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's 500 square feet. Go nuts. It's going to take a 5-minute showing. So those I think should be on a lockbox. I think where you can make maybe a counter argument is, hey, it's a $4 million listing and it's, a 4,000 square foot house with all these high end, appliances and multimedia packages and stuff that you need to like actually show them, the functionalities of the house makes a little bit more sense. But
that's where it exists in Toronto. Like on the higher end, when I'm showing properties, at this point, it's over 3 million. It's kind of like listing agent must be present. And that's pretty common.
Let's talk about a little bit where it came from. I don't get too deep in the weeds on this, but it came from, in my opinion, there was so many, obviously Toronto is similar to Vancouver. There's a lot of agents. So one of the easy things to do for someone that's less experienced and not able to show their value is to say, we will be there for every showing. And that just puts the seller's heart kind of at ease a little bit. And it's when you don't have a lot of other value to bring, like negotiation skills or whatever you are bringing to the table, you can't explain that to your seller. It's easy to say, well, no, I'll be here for everyone. And then they can understand that because now they can see you working. And I think it's actually a result of having probably too many agents in the marketplace, which is why I'm shocked that Toronto has not yet gone that way.
Well, even what I was thinking is, so like, tell me if I'm wrong here, but if I bring a buyer, so like, Saretsky, if I show one of your listings in Vancouver and I bring my buyer, either you're there to open the door or your licensed assistant or team member is there to open the door for me. Do you just wait in the hallway? Because I've always found it's awkward. You can't have a conversation with your buyer when the other agent's standing there, like looking at you.
Yeah. So, I mean, like the practice of the protocol is basically like, as a listing agent, I'm in there and I'm like, oh, here's this, 1-bedroom condo, and the building is great because X, Y, and Z. And oh, by the way, there's these amenities, Oh, and the Stratify, yeah, the Stratify is $350 a month. So I'm just there basically just like answering questions. But I would agree with you, like having gone on many, many buyer tours, like I prefer when the listing agent isn't there, because yeah, it's like you said, you can have a free open dialogue and be like, hey, this place sucks. Like, have you seen this deficiency? Let's go to the next building. And like, I think you'll have more, better hopes of that one. But like, you can't say that when the listing agent's there. It is uncomfortable.
And you know where it's gotten to now.
Steve, hang on. I'm going to jump in there real quick. You're probably spending most of your time in a showing babysitting the buyer's agent, because they're probably a guy that does 3 or 4 deals a year. And you have to inform them. Like, honestly, like if they're asking you how much the Stratify is, obviously you've not filled out the form, or the other guy didn't bring the piece of paper with him. And I would assume it's usually the latter, right?
Yeah, well, that's a whole other conversation. That's it's a big
all right, let's get on
point.
to something way more interesting than lockboxes. Let's get on to this financial doom that we have looming.
Well, okay, yeah. So let's talk about 2023 outlook. This is so weird because you're both named Steve. I'm just gonna go by your last name. So Saretsky, you're on the macroeconomic side of things, very well versed. What's your outlook coming up, at least on the first half of 2023? How do you feel like things are going to play out here?
I think it's going to be like a slow grind lower. Personally, I just think like. So I mean, first of all, I did a Twitter poll the other day. I just asked people. I gave people a range of options. I said
the darkest hole of the internet.
Yeah, the National House Price Index will finish the calendar 2023 year down or up by how much percent? Right. And I think the options were like plus or minus 5%, flat, and it basically the consensus almost 80% were like. And this is like, there's about 5,000 people that went on there and voted. So it's kind of interesting. Like, I think it's a decent segment. And about 80% said like lower. And there was a huge segment that said it's going to be dropping by 15% or more. So I think the sentiment is overwhelmingly negative, that everyone's just been so revved up waiting for like the Canadian housing crash that we've been talking about for over a decade, that I think there is a potential catalyst where maybe like, how much of this bad news is priced in. Right. So my personal opinion is I think prices are going to move lower over the next 3-6 months.
Yep.
And I think we'll probably finish 2023 lower. That's my opinion. But I also wouldn't be surprised that sentiment and consensus is leaning so far one way that like, I don't know. I don't like being on the same boat as everybody else. So it kind of bothers me a little bit. I'm like, kind of like, well, maybe like where could this potentially go wrong? And I just think like maybe rates drop a little bit lower than people expect. We're starting to see inflation come off. I think there's a lot of these catalysts that people are calling for that we're going to destroy the world have not really come to fruition.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's kind of my opinion. I think like sales are going to pick up here just because like we're running at like 20-year lows, which is clearly not sustainable. But they'll pick up because sellers are starting to become a little bit more realistic. People that listed at the end or in the middle of 2022 didn't get their price, took their property off the market. They're going to try again in the spring. I think they're going to end up facing reality, which is just accepting a slightly lower price.
Do you think a part of it too is like you had your following on Twitter when the market was great, when the market started to cool off, where we're at now, where kind of the formula now to grow following on Twitter in the real estate space is be a bear, be super pessimistic, and everyone's kind of bought into that. And you feel like that's part of why those answers were that, or that's actually what people are feeling, or it's just they follow 5 people on Twitter and they're all saying that. And it's like, well, these people said that, that's my answer.
Yeah, I think it definitely because I think it can definitely form part of your identity.
Yeah.
I remember like one of my he's become a client, but he's a pretty well respected like portfolio manager and someone that I've always respected. I think he's just a brilliant thinker. And I remember him saying to me, because we were both like super bearish on housing, and remember he ended up buying a house through me, I think in like 2018 as the market ended up bottoming, and he got a really, really good price. But he's like, man, at some point, you're going to have to flip, right? He's like, you can't be that like perma bear. Like we're both bearish. I just bought a house, but at some point you got to flip and go bullish, and you got to be willing to go both ways. And so I always took that in the back of my head. And, that was the thing. I think like early on during the depths of the pandemic, I was pretty bearish, as anyone would with unemployment jumping to like 10%. And then it was clear that, like, you know, despite what Tiff Macklem and the Bank of Canada was saying, like, this wasn't pent up demand. This was like the start of like a huge bull market. You know, it flipped super bullish, and people definitely didn't like that. And you know, I think today I'm a little bit more neutral. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just, at the end of the day, it's like, what do you want? Do you want to build an audience just for the sake of building an audience, or do you really, you know, do you want to help people and have credibility?
So it sounds like you're short term bearish for at least the next 12 to 18 months. And then I think that's kind of where I'm at as well. And then long term, I am bullish. I do think that long term and owning real estate in Toronto, I think will be a good thing long term. That's my opinion. Not everyone's going to agree, and that's fine. Now let's shift slightly here to BC new rules coming out, because I got the two Steves from BC. Let's get into it. So as far as I understand, cooling off period is now in effect, and so is the end of the rental restrictions. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Karrasch, do you want to start with, like, does this change anything? Have you had a deal yet with the cooling off period? And then we'll go Soretsky, and just I want to get your thoughts on it.
We wrote our first offer last night with cooling off period paperwork. First of all, it all crashed yesterday.
Really?
All of our all the web forms with the new forms crashed yesterday. So awesome job. We're writing it. It's extremely confusing. I've got video after video after video on my channel about the forms and the paperwork. But here's the trouble that we're having. Try to explain to a buyer that they have a cooling off period, a fee for exercising that cooling off period, and then that cooling off period doesn't matter in your transaction. Like, it does not apply. So
when you have they have other conditions already in there? Is that what you're saying?
It basically doesn't apply. Here's the best part. I can serve you a release in the 3 days, and the release, I don't pay a fee, and the rescission period, I do pay a fee. So which one are you going to do? So it only comes into play when the offer is unconditional or less than 3 day conditions. And then we still have to fill it out for every single offer. So it's stupid. And it's going to do nothing. I don't think it's going to do anything. Could it have helped previously? Would it have stopped a few people from buying properties earlier in the year, a year ago? Yeah, it would have.
I'm more confused after listening to that.
Totally, 100%.
I mean, full disclosure, I actually, like, I know what the rules are. I haven't actually gone through like the full web forms and like the I guess the video course they walk you through. It's still early. I just got back from vacation, so I haven't actually had written a deal yet this year. So that's probably good for me to go brush up.
Steve, it's going to be so messy and sloppy. And remember all those agents we were talking about earlier that don't know how to use a lockbox?
Oh, man.
Now walk those guys through it, and they haven't. You have to fill in all the information before you know the accepted price. So I have to fill out the fee, the rescission period fee, before I know the accepted price. Like, it's just stupidity. And it hasn't been very well thought out. But what about, let's take the paperwork out of it, the agent side out of it. Steve, what do you think it's actually going to do to the market?
I mean, my initial thought process when it came out was like, I did this like interview on a radio yesterday about it because they're asking me, and it's funny because like you're trying to explain it to the general public who transacts once every 10 years.
Yeah.
And so they just think like, oh yeah, of course this realtor is not for more regulation because, you know, he's a slime ball. And it's like, no, like if you actually understand how the industry works and you're putting together, you know, deals every year, it's okay. So the simplest answer I can give, I was like, okay, imagine if you're a home builder that buys, you know, 2 or 3 houses a year, and, you know, you tear down old houses, you build new ones, and you resell. You're a spec builder and you do this for a living. You've done it for the last 20 years. You don't need a rescission period. You don't want a rescission period. You want to come in with no conditions so you can get the best price. You say, listen, Mr. Seller, I'm asking you to leave some money on the table, but I can close in 3 weeks, and I'm giving you no subjects, all cash, and I want the best price. A home builder doesn't need a rescission period. Now, a first-time home buyer might want that because they've never gone through the process and they're all nervous and whatnot. But when I say no, now you've got those two buyers pitted up against each other. Like now I mean, they're not necessarily identical, but they're very similar. Like they both basically come with almost subjects at this point, right? So like now you're basically just competing on price. So it's like you're not making the housing market, let's say, any more affordable. Now you have two, three, four, five buyers competing on a property that are all basically coming in essentially with conditions.
And then the big thing too, right, is like if you do exercise it but pay the penalty in that time frame, who gets the money? Where does it go? Who's it like? What? I'm confused. Does anyone know? Do we know what's going on?
We do know, and it
Okay.
has. Here's the best part. That is the part of the new contract of purchase and sale that has nothing to do with the brokerages.
Okay.
So the seller has to go chase down the buyer if the deposit's not already paid, and our deposit usually gets paid on firm.
Which is way different than Ontario.
After acceptance, not on acceptance. So at some point when our seller comes to us and says, well, that guy reneged, I want to go after my money, I go have fun. Because it has legally nothing to do with the brokerages, which again is stupid. But
right. And just for context, if it's $1 million property, which is pretty standard in Vancouver, it's a $2,500 deposit. So it's like, are you really going to go and chase this guy down for $2,500? Well, I don't know. I'm assuming you would go to like a civil tribunal to try to
small claims,
back.
I would assume. And then, like for instance, Tom, the video I just put out on my channel has to do with a lawsuit where a buyer didn't pay their deposit, and
I saw that
sold for less. So it was like a $970,000 loss. It took them 6 years to go through court. So 6 years for my $2,500. Thank you very much. Like it's ridiculous. It's never going to happen. But.
Was that long? I actually had a deal this year on the listing side with the buyer. Just never came up the deposit. Had to resell it.
Did it sell for less?
So we were in the process of going through the legal stuff. Even my seller was like, "This is a disaster. Like this is."
Yeah, we had one as well where the completion did not happen, and it wasn't the buyer's fault. It was the buyer of their property didn't complete, so the domino didn't go. And it's going to be years. It's going to be many, many years. This episode of the Tom Storey Show is brought to you by the Real Estate Video Course. Today's real estate industry has changed, and you can no longer rely primarily on door knocking, cold calling, and geofarming. While these strategies still work, video provides something that these traditional methods just don't. And that is leads that reach out to you because of you and the message and content that you are providing. I believe that video is king, and that through video, you can leverage your message, create stronger relationships, and become the authority on real estate in your marketplace. The Real Estate Video Course is a 5-part course that will teach you the fundamentals of video, including why it's so impactful, the equipment that you need to invest in to get started, and the proven tips and strategies used to ensure long-term success. So go to videocourselogin.com today to become a true creator, level up your editing and production skills, and develop your real estate video plan to leverage your message to current and prospective clients. That's videocourselogin.com. The link is below in the description, and don't forget to use the discount code TOMSHOW at checkout for 10% off any purchase. That's videocourselogin.com and use the checkout code TOMSHOW. That's TOMSHOW. But they won. That's the thing. If you
took 6 years, but they won.
They won $1 million. So the buyer doesn't have the property, and they have to pay the $1 million loss. So
I guess if it's a big enough loss, it's obviously worth pursuing.
Yes,
because I think the legal sort of scenario plays out that it's a clear precedent. The seller is really entitled to the damages in most cases.
Steve, what's your thoughts on the new rules, though? The David Eby rules for rentals and age?
I think the rental stuff. I think overall it's probably positive for the market. Like, I think you've got a sub 1% vacancy. I think 5 years from now we're still going to be talking about a housing crunch or tight vacancy rates. So I think it makes sense what he's trying to do. I also see the counter side, which is like there's a lot of like people, especially like older people that downsize and they downsize into these like rent restricted buildings because they want like they don't want tenants in their buildings, and they want to. It's most of the people that make up this 20-unit apartment building are like everyone's like 50 plus. So I can see why they would be frustrated. But I think overall it's probably pretty good.
Is that not just the new version of not in my backyard? Like no renters in my building is no different than don't develop behind my house. Is that not just a
Yeah, I think so. But also like you also like buy like some of these people bought into these buildings like 7-8 years ago because like they targeted this building because like they knew the people that lived in there. They knew kind of how it was run. It was a tight knit community, and now all of a sudden like you're opening it up to maybe
Investors
30-40%. Yeah, all these, I mean, I don't think coming back to affordability doesn't make the market like more affordable. No, I think what's going to happen, like what is happening or what will happen is like if you were a buyer that bought into like a rent restricted building 4 years ago, chances are is like you got a pretty good price because those buildings always typically sell at a discount because the buyer pool is much smaller, right? So now when they go to resell, their buyer pool is has doubled basically because you've now opened it up to all these investors or even like people like young people, for example. I tend to find they go, well, this is a stepping stone for me. I want to buy into this 2-bedroom condo and then upsize to a townhouse when we grow our family. But just in case the market turns south or whatever, we always want to have the option to rent it. So I think now just the buyer pool gets a lot bigger. So anyways, the real winners here are the people that bought into rent restricted buildings 6 years ago because I think they got a free lift in value.
Financially, they're the winners. What I have I've actually had many conversations since it came in with people that live in both 19 plus and rental restricted, and they're all furious. No one has said to me, hey, I think this is great for my values. They're all worried about crappy landlords next door or upstairs or whatever, and they're all furious. So my take on it is it good for the overall market and supply? Probably. Did anyone want it, or do the voters would the voters have voted it that way, the ones that live in it? Never, because they bought in those, right? The sob story of, oh well, you're bought in a 19 plus complex and now we're having a baby, that is such a minute portion of the overall population that at some point we can't only focus on house prices, because if anything, this is going to drive house prices up. It could drive rentals down, and in my estimation, was probably a speculation tax grab. That was probably
just to chime in there. So the BC speculation tax, they took out, I think it was for this year, they took out the rental exemption. So that didn't change anything on that angle. But what it will do is the City of Vancouver empty homes tax, there's still an exemption when you fill it out, the declaration every year. You can say, well, the house was empty because it's, a secondary property for me and my building is maxed out on rentals, so I wasn't allowed to rent it. So the City of Vancouver says, okay, no worries, your tax, you don't have to pay I think it's 3% annual tax now.
Is that what it is for you guys?
I think it's actually going up. I think it might be going up to 5%.
Because it just came to Toronto and it's 1% this first year.
Oh, so we started at 1, and then I think we went to 2, and then we're at 3. And I think for this year it's 5.
Wow,
it's crazy. Now it's interesting if you say that. I'm not aware that it was exempt previously, because in David Eby's press conference, he said there's 2,900 vacant applications, and we want those to come to market. So
yeah, I think they had removed that exemption. I think they allowed it for the first like 2 or 3 years, the spec tax, and they had removed it, I think, for this year. So, but I think now I think what was likely was they were getting a lot of pushback from people and saying, well, you're basically forcing me to sell my property. I've owned it for 8 years, and I've actually had a client that was in that circumstance. And so now they can say, well, here's this option now, is that will allow you basically to keep it and rent it out.
Yeah. Now, is this in place immediately? Is this an idea? What's going on with it? Like,
it went in 4 days after it was announced. It was the quickest legislation I've ever seen placed at all.
I think the crazy thing, okay, so what I'll chime in here basically and say is the government, I personally, I've met him. I personally like David Eby as a human being. I think he means well. I think he's well intentioned. I don't necessarily like to play politics, but I think that my concern is like the government has just got their hands so far in the market that it's like every like 6 months there's a new policy, and like nothing has changed. Like the housing market hasn't really gotten any better. We haven't really built a whole lot more supply. We haven't really got, lower rents. House prices, they're coming down a bit now, but they're still like incredibly unaffordable. Like nothing's improved. It's just like there's all these like taxes that keep coming out. Like so in BC, like I'm just trying to think over the last like let's say 5 years. Let's just quickly run through this. We've had we got rid of the dual agency in realtors. We brought in an empty homes tax. We brought in a foreign buyers tax. We brought in a school, which is basically a luxury tax on high-end properties. We increased the property transfer tax. Then we increased the empty homes tax again. Then we increased the foreign buyers tax again. Then we brought in the BC speculation tax. Then we removed restrictions on rentals. I don't even know if I listed them all, but this is all in like 5 years.
Now cooling off is in place. Yeah.
Now there's a cooling off period. It's like, and the cooling off period, it's being implemented in one of the like coldest bear markets in 20 years. And then, and then we just banned foreign buyers nationally.
Yeah. So can we talk about that actually? So I was trying to get clarity on this because I'm actually doing the news first thing tomorrow morning, and I did CTV earlier in the week. And on so many of the breakdowns under the exemptions, it was the obvious stuff, but then it said like, okay, units, properties with over 3 dwelling units, so that's everywhere. But the cottages and recreational property, they're not actually exempt. It's on specific areas. So did you guys know I emailed my lawyer, so I'm just going to read the response he gave me just to give everyone clarification, because even he was like, this is my understanding, although we don't have much clarity or guidance from a real estate lawyer. So all buildings more than 3 units are exempt anywhere. Vacant land properties in cities are exempt even if zoned residential. If there is an additional exemption for all remaining residential properties that would normally be prohibited if they are super rural areas. So areas where there's less than 10,000 people. So it's like they are still exempt. Is that your understanding of it as well for both of you?
Yeah. I mean, that's my, it's funny. I reached out to my lawyer like a few times and he was like, I still don't know.
Right.
And this guy's been practicing real estate law for 25 years.
Right.
I don't think they excluded anybody. Like they didn't remove any buyers, right? They didn't remove any. So you've got resort areas. So Whistler, still open season. Also no speculation tax in Whistler, right? Like all of these areas, it made no sense. It was totally just a political play to say, okay, we're banning all foreign buyers except for all the ones that still want to buy. And then you look good, right? Maybe they banned the one guy that was willing to pay a 20% tax on a downtown Vancouver condo. Maybe they banned that guy.
So here's my next question, and I asked my lawyer this as well. Let's say you are one of the people that are exempt under the national ban of non-resident ownership, right? If you are exempt, but let's say you're an international student, and even though it's a $500,000 cap, do you still have to pay the foreign buyer tax even if you're exempt? Okay.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. Wait, but okay, so my question is the foreign buyer ban, I don't think you have to hit. So if it says like we exempt international students and we exempt like foreign workers and they list sort of like the stipulations. Mm-hmm. My understanding is I didn't think you had to hit like every single exemption. I thought it was just like one. You just hit one of them. So it's like basically, I think to summarize for the listeners, to keep it simple, is like if you're more or less essentially, if you're a foreign student or a foreign worker working here, then you are essentially exempt.
Yes.
It's right, basically if you're like, I think with the government, because I always looked at this through the government's lens, which is like, we just brought in 850,000 people over the last 12 months, like all-time record highs. Like clearly the goal from the government is like bring as many people here, ramp up immigration. So you can't tell people to come into Canada and be like, by the way, you can't buy a home.
Right.
You can come and work here, but like you're not allowed to own real estate. Like that doesn't make any sense. So I think they basically have just tried to say, hey, listen, you come here and sort of contribute or play along in the economy, and we'll allow you to sort of own real estate. But if you're just like a guy that lives overseas in China, has no business ties here, spends no money, but buys a condo in downtown Vancouver and leaves it empty, like they don't want that.
Which makes sense, but it's funny, right? Because the general public, they hear ban on foreign buyers, and we've all been told the last decade, the finger's been pointed, and they say they're the issue. They're one of the reasons why. At the same time, we have doubled our immigration targets. So it's like, this isn't solving anything. It's just really good politics, and it's a great headline.
Well, I mean, if you look at like New Zealand banned foreign buyers, I think in what, 2018?
It was 2018.
2019?
Yep.
Yeah. So like their house prices, go look at the chart. I mean, they've ripped since then. It's done nothing. Now prices in New Zealand are obviously correcting because rates are up, 300, 400 basis points on a highly levered housing sector. So I don't know. I think, it's great politics, but it might be a win for the government because it's coming in at a time when like house prices are rolling over already. And they could be like, hey, see, like we brought in the foreign buyer tax or foreign buyer ban, and look, house prices across the nation are down 7%. It's like
amazing
all
at
us.
Spinning it.
We did
it. They're amazing at spinning it like crazy. So
and I think
it had nothing to do with the 1.5% 5-year loans we were handing out. That had nothing to do. Yeah, that was to help business.
It's weird too how the 2 years when it ends is almost perfect timing to when the next election could be as well. So it's maybe they'll run on it again to then keep it going, right? Well, you got to give them some credit once in a while, right? They're obviously thinking these things through. Suretsky, I got a question for you on the personal side of things, on you being so in tune with what is happening across Canada. On your own personal investment strategy, like I'd love to know if you're willing to answer this. Like, are you looking for opportunities this year in real estate? What does your portfolio look like? Are you heavy into what you know? Are you into the stock market? What does that all look like?
Yeah, I mean, I like to. I'm trying to stick to what I know. I think I'm so in depth in the the real estate market that's like stick to what you know and what you're comfortable with. I mean, obviously, I still dabble around in stocks, but I'm not like I'm a horrible stock picker. I don't have the patience for that. My sort of philosophy. So on the real estate side, I'm building like a decent little portfolio in actually Calgary.
Mm-hmm.
It was more just like I thought the valuations were cheap. I thought that it was a stable market. Like Vancouver's like, you're not collecting any yield, and the market's like it's up 10, up 15, down 15, back up 10. So it's like it's way different. Whereas Calgary's just like flat, steady. So if you just like, for me, it's just like been buying residential inner city Calgary residential on redevelopment lots. So it'll be a 85-year-old house that's got very little life left that can be basically torn down and built into 4 units, or picking up a corner lot for these are about $500,000. You can pick up a $500,000 lot, tear it down, and add 6 units, and then just rent them out. And like those are like rent them out and hold like indefinitely.
Those are long-term rents. You're not going to Airbnb those?
No, those would be long-term rents. Yeah, I'm not. I think like I'm not even living in that province, right? So to like hire that out, Airbnb it to collect like a little bit extra yield for me is not worth it. It's just like let's set it and forget it. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm working on.
If you, let's say hypothetically, you bought a property tomorrow and you had to take a brand new mortgage, what are you doing?
I would probably, today, what are we recording?
What we know today. So it's January 4th today. This will be out 4 days later.
Okay. I'm going to variable, or I'm going 1 year fixed.
Okay.
Maybe, and if I'm risk adverse, I might go 2 or 3 years. But to lock in 5 years today at these rates, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm the same thought process. Last episode, we had Noel Mathias on, who also runs a really big Canadian mortgage channel and financial advice. And he was asking Steve what he would do. And it went into a 15-minute breakdown of Steve just being stubborn, of being like, I'm not changing my bank. This is what I'm going to do. I actually got a text from one of the listeners, Steve. It was like, he's so stubborn, isn't he? I'm like, yep.
Dude, I looked at the rates for Manulife yesterday, and trust me, I might be changing my bank.
Okay.
Man, like they are over 1% higher than a lot of the competition right now for their 3-year fixed rate. So we'll see. We'll see.
What's
Nolan
the
Thompson sent some to me.
yeah, I don't know. I think the rates are coming down, but
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
eventually.
what though,
Yeah.
right? Like, but what? Like, let's say they do come down late this year or this time next year, whenever. They're not coming down. I think 1.5 or 2%. Right? If they come down, they're probably
5.
ticking
Yeah.
down. They're probably not. I don't think overnight rate's going to be 2.5 this time next year.
Unless inflation gets
Well, I mean, the only
wildly
reason
out of
why I
control.
would go, the only reason why I would go variable is basically to wait for the fixed rates to come down and then roll out into a fixed. I wouldn't be like, hey, I'm going to ride. I'm actually like, I'm a little bit skeptical. So here's this is like me making a forecast, which will probably be horrendously wrong, but
Welcome to the club. Yeah.
Yeah, you can timestamp this. I think inflation is going to roll over pretty hard, and I think it's going to roll over faster than most people are anticipating. Like I think like Q3, let's say of this year, I think like inflation is going to be like, oh wow, like it really came down. I think bond yields will come down as a result, obviously, because you'll be in a recession. I don't think mortgage rates are going back down to 1.5, but like let's say they're back down to 3%. I still think I think there's a strong probability that you'll have like a double top in inflation, right? So like I think it could roll over in 23, and then like maybe in the back half of 2024, we're talking about 5-6% inflation again, because governments turn on I think like they've figured out that you can just spend money and buy votes, and so I think it is a slippery slope. You've obviously like all the geopolitics stuff, supply chains, coming back on shore, all that other stuff. So I think there's a strong argument to be made that like we could be in a period of more structurally higher inflation. So like I would be nervous about floating a rate indefinitely over the next 5 years. I think if you're on a variable now, I think it's too soon to switch and lock into a fix. But I think people are going to get the opportunity to lock into a fix, and that opportunity is not now.
In a situation though, like if we went to 2.995 year fixed this time next year, aren't we back off to the races again? Doesn't the housing market go stupid again?
I don't know if it goes stupid. I think definitely I think it would be the bottom of the market for sure. I'm also in the camp of like, if you keep getting rates bouncing around from 2.5 and back up to 4, 4.5, back down to 3.5, like just that volatility, I don't know. Like I think we could also be in a period of stagnation. Like maybe housing just moves flat for the next 5-6 years.
That would be so nice.
Right?
I'd love to work
that
in
would
that
actually,
market.
Yeah, but that would actually, what's funny is I'm like, yeah, I'm good for that. But there's actually, I think there would be a lot of investors or speculators or even these, wannabe developers that are going to struggle in an environment where housing is flat for 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
Because their investment thesis is predicated on 8% annual price appreciation.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Saretsky, I want to ask you about the macroeconomics stuff. So I know when I got my real estate license, I just wanted to sell real estate to people and meet buyers and sellers. And you've taken it to a level of understanding of, the Canadian economy much, listen, I think me and Steve Karrasch, I've got to know you a bit the last 6 months, but me, Steve Karrasch, we kind of run in a group of real estate agents that take their business very seriously. They're all high producers. We're kind of in our little bubble, and then we hear stuff that's going on outwards. We're like, okay, that's crazy. But then I started finding your stuff. I'm like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about, and he's a real estate agent. So why are you interested in macroeconomics? Where did that come from? We asked Brandon Ogmanson. We had him on the show, and he said it was a what movie was it, Steve? He said Marty McFly.
No. It was Family Ties.
Oh, it's Family Ties.
Family Ties growing up. He said
same actor though, right?
Yeah,
Michael J. Fox. Yeah. So what was it for you? What got you so interested in this side of things?
I've always just, I think to build a business successfully in any industry, you have to be always curious about learning and growing. And so I don't know, I just remember getting into the real estate industry in 2015, and everyone's like, oh, is it foreign buyers? Is it this? Is it that? What's driving the market? And like as a newbie agent, you're just like, oh, it's supply and demand. Like what's driving the demand? What's driving the supply? And then you just go down like these rabbit holes, and I just became so infatuated about like learning and started subscribing to all these like newsletters and research firms and like just learn. I loved it, man. I picked up like every book I could read about, economics and global capital markets. And like I said, I'm still learning. I'm certainly not an expert, but I like to learn from other people, and that's kind of what I figured like if I could use that, I could kind of like help my clients to like, assess like risk and also obviously selfishly for my own like portfolio too. Like I want to like, I think to be able to invest, I think you have to understand like how money moves.
Did this come to you more when you got your license? Were you interested in this earlier, or was this like when you got your license, got started, you really got into it?
I think more when I got my license.
Okay.
Like I was like, I've always loved like business and real estate, like since I was a kid. So I've always kind of been studying that angle and that aspect. But like in terms of like markets, like macro, like everyone's like that's like I think the way that it's taught in school is so boring. Like I don't know, I took economics and business in college. I didn't really enjoy it because I think the way it's taught is like it's so boring. But then when you go and like you listen to a one-on-one interview with like a couple hedge fund guys, you're like, and they're talking about like all the money they made on these like trades. Like it's like, oh, that's like it's like the greatest like chess game. It's like these guys are trying to figure out like how the world's gonna move, and then they're profiting off of that. So they're not just like two guys that are just like pontificating off of of world events. So like, okay, how can I make money off of this? And so I was kind of like always like, oh, like how can I make money off this? Like if China's gonna devalue the yuan and that's gonna cause money to flood into Vancouver and Toronto, like maybe I can like front run that or help clients to front run that or what have you, right? And I think today it's like you better understand what's driving interest rates to go higher and what's potentially going to cause them to come back down.
Yeah,
because that's going to matter for like I worry that people are potentially going to capitulate on the highs. Like I heard this one story called into Scotiabank like a couple weeks ago, and I was like, hey, I'm just curious. I've got one floating mortgage with Scotia on a rental property in Calgary, and I was like, I'm just curious, like what's the cost for me to break this variable and lock in a fixed? And she's like, oh, well, the best 2-year fix we can offer you is 6.2%. And there's a penalty, by the way, of like $10,000. I was like, oh, my God. I was like, and it's like a $400,000 mortgage. It's clearly not worth it. And I was like, well, is there any chance you could like waive the fee or can you get me a better rate? Like, she's like, no, I trust me. I had someone call in yesterday and he, he broke his mortgage. He paid $13,000 penalty and fixed it at 6.2%. I'm like,
wow.
So like, you know what I mean? I worry that people are just like,
they're not educated enough.
Like, I don't know if they're not educated enough, but maybe just like panicking, or maybe they don't understand. Like maybe they're not intuitive enough about markets that they're just like, oh my gosh, like they make the wrong decision at the wrong time. It's like the people that basically buy high and sell low.
Right.
So my biggest thing is, yeah, no, sorry to ramble on here.
No,
but
it's good.
So, okay, you guys both running real estate businesses, you probably see the same thing that I do, which is I've got a lot of buyer clients right now. We've set them up in good situations. Like some of them we helped sell their property 8 months ago, lock in really high price. And they said, you know what, we're going to go rent for 12 months and we're going to buy a bigger house, which is always what we wanted to do. And no, everyone's waiting right now for a better entry point. So the market's down, let's say in Vancouver here, let's call it 15%. So I'm waiting for a better entry point. I'm like, well, I sold your place at the highs. You've now got an opportunity to buy back into 15% lower, and you're waiting. And you and everybody else is waiting. But when the market's at all-time highs back in January, February, everyone was trampling over each other to get into the market. Nobody wanted to wait. Why not wait 4 months? The market clearly was unsustainable. So it's interesting, right? I just feel like people are just, it's human behavior to follow the herd, to follow what your peers are doing. When your friends and family are telling you you're crazy for buying right now, the market's down 15% and it's going to go lower. Steve did a Twitter poll and 80% said the market's going lower. Why would you buy? And I think now is actually the time you're not going to time the bottom. If you buy today, yeah, it probably will move lower.
Well, I think our buddy Foch says too, right? It's almost better to buy when it's going down than it is to go up, because at least it's not the peak, right? Like it's safer on the down than it would be on the up.
But everybody thinks they're gonna pick the bottom, and it's like you're basically waiting for the home price index, the HPI, to officially bottom, and once it officially bottoms, then you're gonna go and buy. But the reality is I think the best deals are negotiated when sentiment is the worst. Because the sellers are panicking. They're like, rates are going to keep going up. Inflation is out of control. Tiff Macklem says rates have to keep going higher. Just get me out of here.
This episode of the Tom Storey Show is brought to you by Lendlord. If you've not heard of Lendlord, it is a software platform designed for real estate investors. It helps you easily track your portfolio and get reminders when things like rent and utility payments are due. But the best feature and my most favorite feature of the entire platform is something called a deal analyzer. This is where you, as a real estate investor, can log into the software, plug in your future potential purchase, and the system quickly comes up with important information like cap rate, cash on cash return, and even future potential values. It's a totally free software, but listeners of the Tom Storey Show can get 90 days of the upgraded paid version right now totally for free by either clicking the link down below in the description or going to lendlord.io/TomShow. And if you're a real estate agent and you're not using this software to quickly and efficiently analyze deals for your clients, well, I think you're doing your clients a disservice. Download Lendlord today for a quick and easy way for you to analyze not only your own future purchases, but those of your clients. So again, that's lendlord.io/TomShow to sign up right now, and listeners of the Tom Storey Show receive 90 days of the paid version totally for free. I have tried this software myself. I think it's fantastic and extremely useful as a real estate investor. Sign up today. That's lendlord.io/TomShow. And now back to the podcast.
Karrasch, I know you look at you're a nerd on the numbers for the first 4 days of January so far. Have any listings come to the market? Is it going to be a dry January, not just for your alcohol consumption, but for listings?
Man, yeah, my alcohol consumption's zero. So we dropped off from I think about 4,800 listings to I think 3,400 listings on New Year kickover.
Sure.
So, and now my buyer's agents are basically saying, hey, I'm starting to see in our TouchBase system all the other showings that are happening. There's so many more showings on stuff that's been on the market for 90 days because there is not a lot. Right. There's not a lot on. I brought on one yesterday, one today. I was supposed to have a third come on. It got delayed. It's coming next week, one a week after that. So they are coming. I'm trying to get people on now because there is, again, a complete, like a healthy market for us in the Fraser Valley is 6,000 listings, and we're currently at 3,400. So that's still not in a healthy market. And if interest rates weren't, like Steve was saying, 6.19%, I got people stacking up. People are just like, I want to do something. Can I qualify is a different thing right now. So I am seeing a shortage. I am seeing a continuous shortage of new inventory coming to the market. And I don't think that is going to change anytime soon. If anything, people are starting to buckle down and say, well, because again of uncertainty, I'm also not coming to the market.
Are you seeing that in Vancouver too, Soretsky?
Yeah, there's hardly any inventory right now. I think I definitely think you're not going to see that inventory start to pick up until late February, early March, as it normally does. I don't know. The question is are we? If you look at total inventory levels, total active inventory that's listed for sale in the MLS, it's really low.
Yeah,
it's really low. So thank God you've got really weak demand, because the inventory levels that we have today suggest we should be seeing double-digit price growth, but because the demand is so weak, that thankfully it's amazing that prices are actually dropping given where inventory levels are.
Yeah, it's like
I
I
think
think one of the first times in a long time where we're fundamentally in a balanced or balanced market based on inventory, where prices are dropping.
Yeah.
Right.
I think inventory is going to increase. I don't know
Hope it
how
does.
much.
Yeah. Well, we were
So,
talking. Yeah, go on.
go ahead.
No,
Well, I
go
was
on.
just gonna say inventory levels. So like we're kind of like running at or very close to like sort of 2008 sales levels in most of sort of Greater Vancouver area. Inventory levels are literally half of what they were in 08, 09 though. So you're kind of running at similar demand levels, but half the inventory. So just to put that into context for everyone that's kind of
Yeah, I think
watching the market.
2009, 2010, even 2011, there were some spots where the Fraser Valley hit 12,000 active listings. And like you're saying, about the amount of sales now, right? So there was a couple of years where it was like only 30 maybe percent of the listings that came to the market actually sold. And so it's not nearly the doom and gloom that everybody would wish for when, the commenters are watching all
Steve,
of our videos.
You're in. Is your predominant market Surrey?
Yeah.
What would you say if you had to? I know like every little segment's a little bit different, but like okay, if you said like, oh, so what's the typical detached house down from the peak? 15?
25%.
25?
25 and close to 40 in the valley, like Abbotsford Mission.
Based on that
Are you
one
down?
month, right? Based on February.
Based on February average price, February 2022, which also.
But if you're going like average, I'm saying like if you had to like price the typical. So like if a house was selling, let's say in February, if you took that same house and tried to resell it today, how
my
much lower
particular
do you
house, like I think about my neighborhood all the time. I'm probably 1.6 right now, and at the peak, our highest neighborhood sale was 1.98. So let's say $2 million. So 20%.
Yeah, okay. So that's kind of in line with what I've roughly been tracking. So you got your detached down about 20%, let's say. What's your townhouse is down what? 15?
15, let's say, sure.
And what's a condo down?
They're starting to slide now, but yeah, 10, less than 10, maybe somewhere in there. Really depends on the market, but not nearly as much. I am seeing condos starting to slide more now than ever. Like the detached are starting to kind of find a bit of a valley in the bottom. Whether or not that changes with another rate increase, I don't know. But we're so much more sensitive because I think we just have so many more high leverage blue collar workers than probably Vancouver
totally.
does, right?
And you guys rip like in Vancouver. So this is the thing is like everyone paints the market the same stroke. Like, so I know Surrey condos. I do very little out there, but I'll do usually a couple a year, anyways. The prices in Surrey, and especially for condos, went way up. Whereas like in Vancouver, downtown condos during the pandemic dropped about 10%,
which is nuts, right? Like I a year ago, 2 years ago now, Steve, I bought a 2-bed, 2-bath for $475. In April of this last year, it was probably $685. Right.
Crazy.
And now if I assume it's probably $599. So like
still
the ups and downs. Yeah, still like even my house pre-pandemic, even after the first year of the pandemic, my house was about 1.2. So we're still probably up, a massive amount since then. It is absolutely crazy, the ups and downs. And where I am in the valley, and I'm sure Toronto is the same thing, as soon as you get out into the burbs, it's a lot more leveraged and a lot higher fluctuations.
It's a totally different demo. So it's like, okay, so just not to like steal, I know you're rambling on here, but like
it's great.
We ramble. That's what we
ramble.
do.
That's what we do.
So think about this. This is like what I'm always trying to like explain to like people that are outside of the market observing that, again, transact once every 10 years, whatever. Rates are up. We talked about inventory being like half of what it was in 08, 09. So it's still really, really low. And everyone's like, yeah, but just wait. There's going to be a flood of inventory. Nobody can afford their houses. People that own, let's say in Vancouver here on, a detached house on the west side, which, starting price point's $2.5 million, and that's like a teardown. Those like people that own $3.5-4 million houses typically aren't levered. They don't really care that rates went from 2 to, because they're not borrowing at 80% loan to value.
Yeah.
These are people that like are, I mean, a lot of them are old. It's old money. They've owned these houses for 30 years. They bought them for, a fraction of what they're worth today, and they have no debt. So those, you're not going to get a flood of like listings just flooding that market. And I think it's important to understand like the nuances of each market too. For example, like, hey, if you bought a house on the west side of Vancouver, detached at the top of the market when all the foreign money was funneling into this market in 2016, you're still underwater. 2016, if you bought at the top in 2016, $3.5 million house on the west side, you're still underwater.
Crazy.
So it didn't have like this huge pandemic lift really either. So I don't know, just nuances.
I would love to shift topic just a little bit because we're approaching an hour here, and I want to try and get a good portion of our audience is actually real estate agents, specifically on the audio side of things. Can you tell us about your journey into real estate, or kind of how you started? Like, has it been YouTube from the beginning, and is YouTube driving your business, or do you have a lot of other, or did you dabble in other things first? How did you get into that space? Maybe what percentage of your business, if you feel comfortable talking about that, is coming from that, or have you just kept your business separate and you've just got this kind of macro hobby that you're doing on the side? How does that work?
Big question. That's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. I think when I got into the business, Jan 2015, just started off with like everyone else, just kind of, was solo. My mom was actually in real estate, so I kind of like worked next to her for the first 7 or 8 months, did a whole bunch of her open houses, would pick up the odd buyer lead here and there, but it was a battle. And I was always kind of like, well, how can I, so in her market, she was like out in South Delta, which is like very old school. Like there's like a couple realtors that basically dominate. And if you're not advertising in the local newspaper, you're not relevant. And I was like, well, I don't have a budget to advertise in the local newspaper. Who advertises in a local newspaper? Like, that's insane. So I decided to like move out to Vancouver on my own and just kind of like pounded the pavement, did a whole bunch of open houses every weekend, and just decided to go into like modern marketing. I was like, well, where most of the realtors are, I think the average age of a realtor is what, 50 plus?
Yep.
So I was like, well, like I can figure out how to start a WordPress website. And so I actually think I started a blog. I started writing in sort of 2016, I want to say, when the media was talking about the media was just talking about Vancouver real estate every single day. They're like, foreign money, prices are going up, people are flipping properties like crazy. And so I just started like accumulating stats and started going on Twitter and Reddit and talking about it. And then like I think a lady at the Global Mail was like, hey, can you comment on the story? And then from there it's like the CBC calls and like, hey, we saw you comment on this in the Global Mail, can you talk about this on our show? And so I basically started, and so my blog actually took off. I had a WordPress website, the blog took off, and my real estate lawyer at the time says, you need to start doing like videos for YouTube. And I was like, that's stupid, man. No one and anyways, I just started putting them up, and honestly, I didn't really get any traction for a good probably 12 months, like not one client, but I just kept doing them every Saturday. And now I would probably say it's probably the main source of my new clientele.
Well, you're getting a ton of views. Like you're one of the biggest channels in Canada for real estate news by far.
I mean, it's humbling. It's been a lot of work. I think I've been doing that channel. So like I said, I think for at least 6 years, every Saturday. I don't think I've missed maybe 4 weeks out of all those. So every Saturday, and just putting it out, replying to comments, getting feedback. You take a lot of crap on there too. And
that we do.
You gotta really push that down. But yeah, it's been a great source. Like, the people that you get, it's crazy. Like you never know. And like I had this one client, they were like, hey, I've been following your YouTube channel for like since 2016, and they just reached out like a year ago, and I did like 10 deals with them.
Crazy.
So you never know, and so people will be, hey, I watched your YouTube channel for 18 months and I want to buy a detached house for $2 million on the east side of Vancouver. Can you help us? Okay, let's go meet for coffee and sign you up.
Well, there's a big push right now too, and me and Steve are part of the push, is like trying to train other real estate agents how to actually create a YouTube channel, which isn't just the normal boring property tour videos or here's the 5 reasons I'm a great agent, because no one gives a crap, like actual information. And we even run a course on it, and we've got a lot of people that are doing it. And it's like, they're at 500 subscribers, but they're doing 5 extra sales a year on top of their business to already do something they're enjoying. And I'm like, this is such a win-win. And I'm sure you've noticed this too. The people that reach out because of it, they really like you. They really like you and they want to work with you. And it's not that it's easier business, but it's a bit more fun, I would say.
Oh, I think I don't even like working with people that don't know me.
Right.
Like I don't like I'll get referrals occasionally from like my mortgage broker, and like those are nice referrals. They're still pretty easy to work with, but like a lot of them still don't necessarily like know who I am, what I'm about, how I think about the markets, and it's just way easier of a clientele. And they're like, I've been watching your YouTube, or I've been following you on Twitter for 2 years, and I know the way you think, and I think like you because I've been following you for so long. And so like there's such an immediate syndication, and then like it's just easier to form relationships with those people too, and they're more likely to refer you because they're like, oh, like you got to go follow this guy on YouTube. I was following him for years. He helped me buy a house, and now I've made all this money. It's like it's the best way, I think, to build a real estate business.
Oh yeah, you're preaching to the choir here. Like we're all in on it. We're trying really hard to stay consistent and grow. And not that we think we're ever going to catch you, but we're going to keep pushing, right? And
but just
go on.
Story, just to chime in on that. I mean, I think that's the one thing. I know we talked about it. Tom, you and I did like a little course there for a bit, but like that was like one of my things, which is like you don't have to be like the Canadian real estate guy with hundreds of thousands of views. Like if you're just like, hey, I want to focus on like this pocket of like downtown Vancouver, like that's my specialty. Like you could put out a video a week just on like the downtown Vancouver market, and you'd be like,
that's actually what people should do, right? Like I've got a few guys, even just somebody I've spoke to in the last week that's doing it, and they're doing a great job. But it's like one video about Surrey, one video about Abbotsford, one video about Poco. And it's like, no, you're doing this. Like every single thing I post is like Surrey real estate. And I'm, there's some Canadian in there once in a while, but it's like Surrey or regulation. And I haven't had one person reach out to, well, maybe two people reach out to me for outside of the Fraser Valley Board area.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just like narrow in on your search. Cause I think if I would have done, I'm the Vancouver agent, I would have been competing with you probably for a lot of people and eyeballs. And that's not an area I want to service. So it's such a cool thing. If you live in Kelowna, or I don't know, if you live in Salmon Arm, for all I know, like you're going to be the only guy putting out content in that market, in that area, and you're not competing against all those bus benches and spending all that money. So that's why I've embraced it. So
what's the thing is like everybody used to like, farm. It's like, oh, send out, 10,000 postcards and keep hitting this one area that you want to like service. And it's like, I think you can do that same thing, but on YouTube for basically free.
Just time. That's all it is.
Just time.
Okay, final question here. I actually went to the Hockey Hall of Fame yesterday. It was my dad's birthday. We took our 1-year-old, and I was walking by and I saw the theater. It reminded me that you were just in Toronto for the podcast. So you've now been doing the Looney Hour for just over a year. Is that correct?
Yeah, just over a year. Yeah,
just over a year. So what's that experience been like? And then actually, just before you answer that, I got a question about our podcast. So we created a brand new YouTube channel for our podcast, which we had to grow from zero. And it's 6 months in, where our videos are getting 2,500 views to 3,000, and we're at 1,200 subscribers. It's good. Should I have just posted these on my channel that already had 7,000 subscribers like you do? I want your personal opinion on that.
I'm personally going to say yes.
Okay.
Just because I think you've already spent the time building the audience. Like people won't get confused, right? Like people will figure it out. They don't like. So I mean, that's what we did with the Looney Hour, and so like our top producing platform is still YouTube,
Mm.
even though like it's a podcast and like it lives on, Apple and Spotify and all the other platforms. It still produces the best and most views on YouTube because I'd been building that platform for 6 years. I don't have a platform at all on Spotify and Apple, so it's taking people time to figure out and build that. So I would just say, you've already spent the time building that. I probably would have just created like a new playlist,
Sure,
and said, "Hey, Tom's podcast."
And what's your experience like doing the podcast now? Because your podcast has grown very quickly. You're doing live events where 200 people are showing up to watch you guys talk live. That must be a kind of surreal experience from where this started, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's humbling, right? I mean, like, I don't know, like, I think the biggest thing is just like, you like talking to Rich and Keith, who are my co-hosts. Like they're in different aspects of the financial world. Like just talking to them, it just kind of like it puts you back into like your seat, which is like, I really don't know that much. Like I'm not an expert. Like I think I'm really, I think I'm fairly sophisticated in the real estate space. It's my, when I talk to Rich and Keith, I'm definitely well above them in terms of their understanding. But when you go back into the financial markets, it just humbles you. Like it's a learning experience. And, we're trying to like grow alongside our audience. And I think the big thing is like what I'll say is about like building content. I think the biggest mistake I see realtors make, or any, person make for that matter, is they're always looking for like, what's in it for me?
Mm.
I'm going to produce this YouTube show and I didn't get any, you need to buy or sell with me. What's in it for me? It's like, no, just put out the content, help as many people as you can. And people will be compelled to basically give back.
You know what's really cool,
Like-
Steve, is the answer you just gave is the exact same answer Nolan gave on our last episode, and you guys are like similar levels of subscribers online, where he said the same thing. He's like, I give with no expectation of getting anything back. And so it's pretty clear that if you give without having this other side thing that you're doing it for, you're going to grow. It's neat that
I think
the two of you said the exact same thing, and you're at the exact same level, which is cool.
Yeah, I think people can actually just read. They can read through it. I think they can be like, "Oh, this guy's just like he's producing this because like he just wants to." Like that's why like I've never been like I never at the end of my videos be like, "Hey, and if you're thinking about buying or selling real estate, call me." It's just like people can figure it out. Like my information's in the bio. You can Google Steve Stretsky. It's not hard to figure out like what I do for a living.
Final question, and thank you for being here. There's been a ton of fun. The newsletter that you're doing, you're using Substack. Is that correct?
Yeah, I just moved over to Substack like 4 months ago.
I know that's how you started this whole journey, and you've got thousands of subscribers just that newsletter. If anyone's watching or listening to this, how do they get onto that newsletter?
You can just go to my website, stevestretsky.com. There'll be like a option there to sign up for the weekly Substack. It's kind of like a weekly Canadian housing macro sort of roundup. Mm-hmm. That's the best one. That one just comes through Substack. I still write out a monthly one on MailChimp as well, which is just like a Vancouver report. It's basically a 15-page PDF of my thoughts for that month.
Nice. Amazing. Steve Karrasch, any final thoughts here? Any other last questions?
No, it's I just want to say thanks for coming on. This has been super fun. I'm interested to see where it goes in the future, and I just wanted to tell you that I walked into a listing appointment the other day, and there you were staring at me from the big screen TV.
Oh God!
So I was
making your life.
I think I'm lucky on that list. That listing was in Langley as opposed to Vancouver, because I don't think I would have got it. But hey, I got it.
That's hilarious. I love that, man. It's hopefully making your life a little bit easier so you can talk them down on the listing price there.
It is a lot of fun, like just to see the kind of group. Like I know you've been on with TK and Daryl before and stuff. Like it's fun to see this group, and other people are finding different sources through different people, right? Like I know Tom had mentioned Nolan, and I've had 2 people tell me this week, like, thanks for letting me find that mortgage channel. And it's just interesting to see, like, it's not just one of us out there that people are watching. And that's why you can't be afraid, for anybody that's listening that's trying to be an agent that to get on YouTube. You can't be afraid like, oh, there's not going to be enough time in the day, because the people that want to listen to you talk about macroeconomics, they'll probably listen to that all day long before they maybe go put on any music or watch Netflix at the end of the day, right? So it's interesting there's lots of space and lots of different types of people. And I think it's cool what you're doing. And I hope you keep it up, man, forever.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This has been fun. I could have kept going for another hour. You guys are awesome.
Well, we'd
Hey,
love
man, I got time.
we'd love to have you back. By the way, if you're watching on YouTube, comment below who is Steve number 1 and who is Steve number 2. I'd just like to know your thoughts. Well, I know what my answer is. It's what I'm looking at on my screen, but
in order. You're first,
in
Tom.
order.
You like yourself. Tom likes himself first.
I'm actually Steve number 1.
Okay.
I just feel bad my name's not Steve on this episode. That was a lot of fun. Thank you guys. For the listeners and the watchers, thank you so much for being here, listening. I hope you learned something today. I know I certainly did. We'll see you next Sunday. Have an amazing week. Bye.
Bye. Like, subscribe. Did you just call them watchers, Tom?